My name is Shawn Coleman, and glad to be with you as always, wherever you are and wherever you are listening. You're having a great start to your week. And with me, as always, the guy that I love talking Grizzlies basketball with, Mr. Damichael Cole. Damichael, how are you doing this morning, sir?
Shawn, I'm doing great. I had a great weekend. Enjoyed spending time with the family. It was a lot going on. The Grizzlies game was Saturday, and it was a long day for me. It was a 2:30 game, but I mean I didn't leave FedEx Forum till around 9ish. So a long weekend, but a fun weekend, Shawn. Ready to get into the good things that's going on around this team this week.
Absolutely. And of course, game one is in the books of the NBA playoffs. And though the result was not there, hey, that's why we got six more to sit here and talk about. Welcome to Locked On Grizzlies. Obviously, you can find me at Stats SAC, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal at Damichael C. Both of us are credentialed media members, me over at Grizzly Bear Blues, Damichael over at the Commercial Appeal. Your co-host here at Locked On Grizzlies, your Grizzlies every day. You can find the podcast at Locked On Grizz and free on all platforms. And listen, there's plenty of great Grizzlies coverage out there, but it starts here with Locked On Grizzlies, and we've got plenty to talk about. Obviously, if you're a Grizzlies fan, you know what occurred on Saturday. Game one, Timberwolves versus the Grizzlies. And let's just start and be straightforward. Much of the narratives that were there during the season as to why the Timberwolves were a tough matchup for the Grizzlies, stylistically, obviously with their big players and D'Angelo Russell, Karl Anthony Towns, and Anthony Edwards, all that showed up on Saturday. And unfortunately, the same troubles that the Grizzlies had during the regular season, much of that showed up on Saturday in a 130-117 loss to the Timberwolves. Damichael, just overall, we've got plenty of things to get into, but what really stands out to you as the takeaways from game one on Saturday?
The simple thing that I'll say before we get into all the nuts and bolts and nitty gritty things is simply they got out hustled. That doesn't happen a lot. They got out physicaled, which is something. It's crazy because all week long, physicality was the biggest focus. I felt like Dylan Brooks talked about it a lot. Taylor Jenkins talked about it a lot, just being physical. And they got out rebounded, 46-35. We don't see the Grizzlies getting out rebounded at all, period, let alone by 11 rebounds, in a game. So you get out rebounded. They got outscored in second chance points. Those are two stats they're number one in the NBA in. So things like loose balls, they're the number one team in loose ball recovery. And I wrote in my story, it's kind of crazy that the big shot late in the fourth quarter, the corner three-pointer by Jaden McDaniels actually came off of a loose ball where it was a hustle play and the Timberwolves beat them to the ball. It was a 6-point game, 2-possession game at that point. If the Grizzlies come up with that loose ball, they have a chance to make it a one possession game. So they just got out hustled. I think, and part of that was the physicality. The Timberwolves came out, they punched them in the mouth.
Absolutely. And it's hard, really to look at we talk about point differential. We talk about certain aspects of the game where one team was much better than the other. And while this isn't necessarily measured that much in a lot of places, you're correct. I would be willing to bet that the Timberwolves had a double-digit point differential in their favor off those loose balls, off the lucky bounces, off of the, loose rebounds. So what have you, yes. And that's what stood out. But let's start early. The thing that really stood out to me was that the Grizzlies, since the calendar turned into 2022, the Grizzlies arguably and statistically have been the best first quarter team in the NBA. They have been kicking other teams' butts in the first quarter of games, giving them the lead, allowing for them to set the tone to be Grizzlies basketball early in games. And that was not the case in game one. The Timberwolves came out. They were hitting early shots. They were more aggressive. They were more physical. They were out hustling us. Anthony Edwards got into a big rhythm. Karl Anthony Towns as well. Every aspect of the game, including the Timberwolves beating the Grizzlies and what the Grizzlies do well, that's what started out. And that is something that the Grizzlies are not used to. And I think it was the Timberwolves setting their tone early. To me, that's what really stood out. The Timberwolves being the early aggressor to take control of the lead.
Yeah, and right before the game started, first of all, the energy in FedEx Forum was insane. Shawn, I haven't been to many playoff games inside the FedEx Forum. I will say that, but that had to be, one of the more anticipated atmospheres, and it really lived up to it. The fans were hyped. They were really chatting. at the players, at the Timberwolves players nonstop over and over and over and over and over throughout the game. So I will start there, but then getting to the point of, the early start. I think the last song that played after introductions and before the game started was 3-6 Mafia's One Hitter Quitter. One Hitter Quitter played, and I mean, it looked like the Timberwolves came out and was a team that threw the one-shot knockout punch. I mean, it was 9-2. I think I looked down at my laptop and boom, it's 9-2 really quick. Now, the Grizzlies did respond. I believe they trailed by as many as 13 in the first quarter, got it close again, made it a 47-47 game, but then Timberwolves hit another run, led by 8 at the half. And I was talking to someone who said that, actually a pro basketball player who said that, when you're fighting from behind like that, you spend so much energy just trying to catch up. So when you catch up, there's not much left, in the tank to overtake a team who's not, they're not using as much natural energy as you are because they're the team in front of you. And that was the fourth quarter, right? The Grizzlies fought all the way back, and the Timberwolves just seemed to have that extra gear going down the stretch.
Absolutely. And the other thing that stands out as well is that, let's just be honest, the Timberwolves are the better shooting team. That's more a part of their overall style of offense than it is the Grizzlies. I'm going to be honest with you. What that means is that the Timberwolves, they're going to be the team that is going to have the easier time catching up a lot of times. And they're also going to be the team that's going to be able to keep the momentum on their side if they've got the lead in this series. I'm not saying they're more talented. I'm just saying that if they're playing their style of basketball to the best of their ability, it's going to be hard for the Grizzlies to be able to match it. Because with the Timberwolves being the better shooting team in this series, that's exactly what happened. And it felt like last year against the Jazz, Damichael, we would make runs to get back. But then the Timberwolves would hit another three. They'd hit another three. They'd hit another three just to stay just a little bit ahead. And that's really what stood out. And that gets to the next point that stood out in this game, the 3-point differential. The Grizzlies only had 7 threes, only 27 attempts, 16 total threes, 41 attempts for the Timberwolves. Malik Beasley, Anthony Edwards. That showed up once again, and that's been the storyline in all of these games. The Timberwolves in 5 games against the Grizzlies this year, 33 more threes. It's going to be very hard for the Grizzlies to be able to win this series, in all honesty, if there continues to be that 3-point differential.
Shawn, you know how much time we spent talking about how much shooting for this Grizzlies team will matter in the playoffs. And the Locked On viewers, you've heard us repeat it over and over, shooting. And they don't have to shoot to the level of the Timberwolves. They don't have to go 16 of 41. You just have to minimize the damage there. 12 of 40 would have been good for the Grizzlies, I think, in this game. And you look at the 7 for 27, I think it was, from 3-point range, and 6 of those were Dillon Brooks and Desmond Bane. Dillon Brooks and Desmond Bane went 6 of 12 from 3-point range. I also mentioned, in one of our preview shows that Ja Morant made 3 3-pointers in the regular seasons in 4 games against the Timberwolves. All 3 of those 3-pointers came in the first game. So now you add on another game. That's 4 consecutive games where Ja Morant has not made a 3-pointer against this team. So that's just uncommon. I think he only attempted 2, in this game anyway, but 3-point shooting has to come a long way. We talked about how Anthony Melton has been one of the hot guys in the NBA. He only played 14 minutes, didn't really seem to get in the groove, in this game as much. I thought Dillon Brooks, he made his first 3 3-pointers. He shot really well. But my biggest takeaway, from the shooting perspective was after the game, when we asked Desmond Bane about the shooting, and he said straight up, the Grizzlies have to take more 3-pointers. And that was his perspective. When a team shoots 14 more 3-pointers than you, there's a natural advantage there if they're even halfway decent, at doing it. And this team made 16. I believe they led the NBA with 14.8 made 3-pointers per game, and they topped their average, whereas the Grizzlies were below their average, and the Grizzlies were still middle of the pack in 3-point percentage. So that has to even out a little bit more. You're gonna need Tyus Jones. It's the way they're guarding Ja, that's taking away the 3-point shot, but he's gonna get his opportunities, throughout, because Taylor Jenkins will have to make some adjustments, and maybe that's gonna be some off the ball stuff with Ja Morant. Maybe not having him on the ball as much, and that'll free him up for some of those spot up opportunities and things like that. But they're gonna need more guys. I mean, Jaren Jackson Jr. He gets his attempts. I believe he was second, this season in 3-point attempts on the Grizzlies. He's going to have to make some. He battled foul trouble. I'm sure we'll discuss that even more, but that's another big thing. They need more shooting. We talked about it. You've talked about it over and over, Shawn, how this Timberwolves team, they have shooters, and we saw it in waves. It wasn't just one guy. I mean, Anthony Edwards did have 36 points, and he was electric, but it was a bunch of different guys knocking down three-pointers. And the Grizzlies, they don't have to make 16 threes like the Timberwolves. They just have to make 10, 11, minimize the gap there, because at the end of the day, the Grizzlies will dominate most teams in the paint. I think they even outscored, the Timberwolves in the paint in this game. They will dominate teams in the paint. So they have to just minimize the gap from the 3-point line.
Absolutely. And the thing that stood out was, as you mentioned, Dillon Brooks and Desmond Bane, they did exactly what they needed to do. 6 of 12 from 3. You get 12 to 15 3-point attempts from them, you're fine. But overall, besides those two, the rest of the Grizzlies were 1 of 15 in the game. 0 of 5 from Jaren Jackson Jr. You need at least 4 players, I think, in the majority of these games moving forward, making multiple threes. The other thing that stood out, the Timberwolves, thanks mainly to Malik Beasley, 7 bench threes in this game. The Grizzlies only had 1 to Tyus Jones. We've got to get those shooting surges from the bench, as I mentioned as well. So plenty of room to grow in the shooting aspect of things. But there are ways that the Grizzlies have proven time and time again they can overcome not being as good of a shooting team as their opponent. But the Timberwolves did a great job of taking those avenues away. We'll discuss how the Grizzlies might be able to counter that coming up. But before we do, I want to get into a little bit about athletic greens. Obviously, athletic greens, you've heard us talk about it plenty of times before. Then it's our next partner product that we talk about, and we use it literally every day. The main reason why it is such a healthy alternative to many of the other options that are out there. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, while still tasting good. Tons of people take some type of multivitamin, and it's important to choose one with high quality ingredients that your body will actually absorb. AG1 is a small micro habit with big benefits. It's one thing you can do every single day to take care of yourself. Athletic Greens was created when the founder experienced a ton of gut health issues and ended up on a complicated supplement routine to cover it. Cost him $100 per day. He created Athletic Greens after experiencing how difficult it was to create an optimal nutrition routine on your own. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NBA network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NBA network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. The other thing I can tell you about also, though we're talking about nutritional options that can make your day better, Damichael, it's Built Bar. We talk about it so much. Built.com is a great place for you to visit. Listen, unfortunately, it's as resourceful as the Minnesota Timberwolves were from 3 on Saturday, because there's so many options the Timberwolves unfortunately utilize from 3. Well, there's so many options you can utilize when it comes to Built Bar in terms of having breakfast in the morning, afternoon as a snack, over 18 different flavors to choose from. If you go to Built.com, let them know that the Locked On Podcast Network sent you, and you get 15% off using the promo code LOCKED15. Visit Built.com today. Obviously, we want to thank you for checking out the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Check out the Locked On NBA podcast for all the great action from all 8 playoff series as your second listen of the day. But Damichael, so we talk about the early start where the Grizzlies struggled. We talk about the Grizzlies, unfortunately, once again, letting the Timberwolves get a big differential when it comes to threes. But here's the other thing that really stood out, and this is a credit to the Timberwolves. I want to make it clear. I understand that the Grizzlies could have played a lot better, but you also have to tip your cap to the Timberwolves. Not only were they the better offensive team, Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards were absolutely phenomenal as a duo, but the Timberwolves did an exceptional job of taking away the Grizzlies' usual ability to overcome being the team that's not shooting as many three-pointers. The Grizzlies were out-rebounded in general, out-rebounded on the offensive end, didn't get as many hustle opportunities. The Timberwolves had 4 more shots. That's another thing that stood out. They did a great job neutralizing Steven Adams and obviously the foul trouble of Jaren Jackson Jr. The Grizzlies' overall avenues of where they can really dominate games just was not there on Saturday.
Yeah, and after the game, talking with the players, I believe it was Desmond Bane who said the players had a lot of dialogue, after the game. I thought that was a noteworthy takeaway from the post-game press conference because they were like, oh, yeah, we've already had our conversation. That's what the players were saying. They've already talked. And Dylan Brooks said in his post-game press conference, they have to do more of the grit and grind stuff, in that game. And then Desmond Bane comes up, a few minutes later to talk to the media as well. And he says, we have to be a little bit more grimy out there. So just hearing both of them say those type of things, using words like grit, grind, and grimy, I feel like that was something that was discussed, in the locker room. The physicality things. Steven Adams had his lowest rebounding total since November 28th against the Atlanta Hawks. 3 rebounds for Steven Adams. We just don't see that. And he was, neutralized because, yes, they put a lot of bodies around him. But you think other teams have not tried putting a lot of bodies around Steven Adams? That's not anything new. The new thing was the fact that the Timberwolves were able to exceed and execute with that game plan. And it forced a guy like John Morant. John Morant had to come crashing down a lot of times because Steven Adams just wasn't available to grab those rebounds. So, the Timberwolves had an excellent game plan and they were physical, but I think the message is clear from the Grizzlies. I mean, game 2, they're going to try to increase their physicality because you just don't see, Steven Adams, get dominated, the way I don't want to say dominated, get neutralized, the way he did in that game. But Brandon Clarke, I mean, you saw it, Shawn. 13 points, 12 rebounds for him. I thought he was a spark plug, and it creates a situation now for Taylor Jenkins and how he has to figure out what to do because this is the playoffs. The playoffs, you throw out all that regular season. Yeah, who cares that Steven Adams played so many more minutes than Brandon Clarke in the regular season? You're focused in on this matchup. And Shawn, it'd be interesting to hear what you think going forward, how Taylor Jenkins should use, these 2 guys. Steven Adams gives you that, the bigger, the bulkier guy who's more physical. Physicality is what they need more of. That's the most physical guy on the inside. Brandon Clarke came into that game against the Timberwolves, and he showed off his mobility. Anthony Edwards made some tough shots over him at time to time, but he was right there in his face, whereas against Steven Adams, they got some easier opportunities. So Brandon Clarke, 13 points, 12 rebounds in that, and I believe he played 27 or so minutes. So he was the more impactful between the 2, but Taylor Jenkins now has a big decision to make on how he wants to just deploy those 2 guys going forward.
There's no doubt Taylor Jenkins needs to make some adjustments when it comes to his overall utilization of 4 players. Steven Adams, Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clarke, and Kyle Anderson. In game 1, the foul trouble of Jaren Jackson Jr. just unfortunately did not play into the Grizzlies' hands. But the Grizzlies do, I feel, have a big enough sample size to know that when Jaren was on the court, especially with Brandon or especially Kyle, they can get the job done. However, I don't think that means that there needs to be a change in the starting lineup. Because really what it comes down to is this, is that, yes, when you look at the numbers from game 1, the Timberwolves, especially Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns, they were 12 of 16 in situations where Steven Adams was the primary defender. However, there were many tough shots that Anthony Edwards made over Steven Adams, but you don't want to see as many times early in the game where it's Anthony Edwards versus Steven Adams away from the basket on pick-and-roll situations. You don't want to see that happen. Yes, he was not effective of stopping those players, but they also made a lot of tough shots against Steven Adams. Here's what it comes down to, and I think that it's pretty simple if you look at it this way. The Grizzlies need to get off to a good early start in game 2. In the NBA, the one player who stands out as having the best plus-minus total in first quarter of this season is Steven Adams. Steven Adams provides that physical aspect that you want against Karl-Anthony Towns. He provides a good, infusion of passing in the half-court offense. He also helps out with offensive rebounds and adds a physical presence. Those things are certainly stuff you still want to be out there, especially early in the games. However, The positives that come from those, are they not as impactful as the negative of his defense? I think that's what it comes down to, Wayne. If the positives of the things that I mentioned are standing out, utilize Steven Adams as you can. But if the defense becomes too much of a liability, that's when you start need to more frequently substituting Brandon Clarke and Kyle Anderson in. And with Jaren Jackson Jr. hopefully being on the court, I think being able to be a better judge of that will make a huge impact on game 2 and be a positive for the Grizzlies.
I'm with you. I'm with you. You continue to start Steven Adams. I think game 3, game 4 is when you start making those big changes, like that. You don't make a change like that off of one game, because first you try to adjust, with your game plan. I mean, they'll come out and they'll do some things differently, probably to, create more opportunities, for Steven Adams to be impactful as a rebounder, as an offensive rebounder. They'll probably do things differently on the defensive end to protect him, from being in those one-on-one situations away from the basket against a guy, like Anthony Edwards, or, being one-on-one with Karl Anthony Towns away from the basket. We saw the Clippers have a lot of success when they played a smaller defender on Karl Anthony Towns and had their 5-man as kind of the rim protector. The Grizzlies are fortunate enough to have Jaren Jackson to be able to protect the rim. So I'm sure that's why, that played a role why Steven Adams stayed on him. But, I mean, maybe there will be some dialogue there about starting Jaren Jackson on him and having Steven Adams be that guy who plays behind him. There's still some things, you can do before you make those wholesale lineup changes. And I think, we'll see, how Taylor Jenkins' minds work. Like he said after the game, he's going to look at the film and he'll go from there.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, the other thing that stands out is that, we talk again about the adjustments of Taylor Jenkins. And I know that Taylor Jenkins, he was asked, at the end of the press conference where it was talked about, Ant Edwards played 42 minutes, Karl Anthony Towns played 43 minutes, so on and so forth. I do think that there is logic. There is a legitimate reason to talk with Taylor Jenkins about how much he's going to play his starters, because at the end of the day, I think that matters. Listen, you can utilize Zaire Williams as a defensive option on the perimeter, throwing him as another body against a D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards. But in my opinion, you've got to be able to make the substitutions. You've got to be able to use your depth in a way that's going to help this Grizzlies team stand out. Steven Adams, Brandon Clarke can be great physical, but the Grizzlies also got to find a way to consistently have shooters out there as well. At the end of the day, I know you mentioned that if you're going to make wholesale changes to philosophy or lineups, game 3, game 4 is really where you need to do it. But one thing that I certainly hope Taylor Jenkins does is at least be a bit more adaptive to his situation. Go to as it needs to be for the be able to stop good stretches for the Timberwolves and get good stretches going of their own when it's needed in game 2.
That's the big thing. And he was asked about, those rotations and I've asked him about it 1,000 times, just how was he planning his rotation, getting ready for the playoff stretch. And it played out kind of how I thought it would. First half, fill out, he used the first half rotation the exact same way, as the regular season rotation when all those guys were available at least. And then in the second half, the first sub was Brandon Clarke for Steven Adams. So that was the adjustment, because usually Steven Adams stays in and then, Brandon Clarke eventually comes in later into the first quarter. So that was the first adjustment in the second half. And then, a lot of those guys, like I think Melton, Zaire Williams, they didn't really get a lot of time in the second half as much as the first. So it got a little bit tighter. John Morant came in earlier in that fourth quarter. I believe he came in around the 9:50 or so mark. So he got pretty much a short break, between the third and the fourth. But that's the thing. I mean, the Timberwolves are going to ride their guys. That was obvious, not only in this game, but that was obvious against the Clippers too. They're going to ride their guys. And Taylor Jenkins, he rode his guys last season. I think John Morant averaged 40 minutes in, that playoff series against the Utah Jazz. So it's not a concern. I think, Steven Adams before game 1, he called it a fill-out game. I think that's kind of how Taylor Jenkins was doing it, as a coach as well, filling out how he wants to deploy these guys. I think game 2 will be a better example of, his plan for attack from rotational perspective. And I think a lot of those guys who were successful in stretches, Dylan Brooks, I thought really played a really good game. He completely blanketed D'Angelo Russell in the first half. I mentioned he made his first three-pointers. And then in the second half, by the time he got on Anthony Edwards, quite frankly, it was too late. I mean, the guy was already cooking, and Anthony Edwards is just really good. So good defense, better offense type thing. But overall, he's going to make those adjustments. And Shawn, I think that's going to be the key. Game 2 is going to reveal more to us about how he wants to use his rotation, his players, his lineups in this series. Because game 1, it's fill out game. You're just trying to see what works. We're going to play our regular season lineup. We're going to see if that works or not. Whereas Chris Finch, again, play inexperience, had that extra game of experience and said, we're going to ride our guns. That's what they did, and it gave them an advantage.
It absolutely did, and that's what we're going to focus on in tomorrow's show is obviously how the Grizzlies can ride their guns, but also some specific matchups that may make sense. But Sunday also brought with it some exciting news when it came to yearly awards for the Grizzlies. Some great news to see from certain perspectives, but also, unfortunately, some snubs when it came to yearly awards. We'll discuss that in just a moment. But before we do, Michael, I'll tell you this. When it comes to the different odds that are out there regarding the NBA playoffs, regarding golf tournaments, regarding, UFC, boxing, whatever it may be, BetOnline.net is the number one source for you. I don't care what you're betting and wagering on. If you want fast, if you want easy, if you want someplace you can go regularly to be able to make it easy on you to bet and wager on the sports that you love, BetOnline.net is the best place for you to go. You can do it on your mobile device. You can do it on your laptop. And the great thing is no matter what sport, you'll be able to consistently put in your bets, put in your wagers fast and easy, and make it to where it's no hassle for you to be able to use. They've even got Vegas casino games to make it fun for you as well. Make sure you check out BetOnline.net, the fastest and easiest way for you to bet and wager on all the sports that you love. Check out BetOnline.net today. On tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, we're going to get into the game a bit more. Film, stats, numbers, whatever have you. We're going to talk about every single aspect of Game 2 that's going to be important to watch out for as the Grizzlies look to get back on track and even this series at 1-1. That on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. But Damichael, we've also spent, besides the playoffs, over the past 2 weeks, the Grizzlies really have not had much to play for in terms of incentive. Well, now we have seen the fruits of their labor pay off a bit when it comes to Ja Morant as well as Taylor Jenkins. It was announced today that 2021-2022 finalists for several big awards. And the two Grizzlies that stand out are Ja Morant, made the finalist list for most improved player with DeJounte Murray and Darius Garland. Taylor Jenkins is Coach of the Year with Monty Williams and Eric Spoelstra. Before we get into those who didn't make it, Damichael, your thoughts on Ja Morant in the MIP award and Taylor Jenkins in the Coach of the Year award. Both coach and player pretty deserving, and I think they're the absolute favorites and the most deserving for those awards.
Yep. So, I mean, no surprises from those two. I think, like you said, Ja is the favorite for that most improved award. But the thing about it is, I mean, Shawn, he doesn't really want that award. Ja Morant doesn't want the most improved player award. He has vouched more for Desmond Bane to win that award. And he even sent out a tweet after, the announcements were made saying that Desmond Bane should have been a finalist for most improved. He completely ignored that he was on the list. He ignored that he is the favorite, going into this final stretch, and votes have already, been submitted, but he is the favorite for most improved. And it's like, it's a weird situation because you want to say he deserved it. I mean, he's a big reason why this team took this big jump, and he went from, rising, star franchise player to all-out budding superstar who started in the All-Star game. He improved a lot. But I think when people think of most improved, they think of, those different type of, Darius Garland played on a team last year that was in the contention for the number one pick. And he, they would have been a playoff team probably if they were healthy. If Jaren Allen didn't get hurt, they were a playoff team. And then you think about DeJounte Murray, same thing. He's been a guy in the league a little bit longer. He already had a first team all defense to his name. and he just worked on his offensive game, and now he's, become a really great two-way player. So those are usually who you think about when it comes to most improved. But John Morant being on that list, it's a little funny because he's a number 2 pick. It's not like he had a bad season, last season. He took this team to the playoffs, and he was the leader on that team as well. So I think from voters' perspective, you wonder how they're going to factor that in as much. You would have liked to see Desmond Bane, get on that list because, he really took that jump, and his jump was as important as anyone's jump on this team. Let's be clear about that. Taylor Jenkins, I'll be short. No surprise there. Shawn, we've talked about it. We talked about how deserving he is of that honor. And it's going to come down to him and Monty Williams in that one.
Absolutely. And let's just, get into it a little bit when it comes to the most improved player. The trend that you see, you come down to 2 things that you're measuring here. You're coming down to who took the most visible leap from where they were last year to where they were this year. That would make you think that a Desmond Bane, who last the 8th man in the rotation for the 8th seed in the West in the playoffs, to making the leap this year to being one of arguably the top 5 shooters in the NBA. That is a more significant jump than where John Morant was last year to where he is this year. That is one side of things. That's where Desmond Bane has the better case, I guess, for the award, where Darius Garland has the better case for the award. But the reason why John Morant is there is the favorite, his landing spot of where he was last year versus this year, it's more significant than where Bane is. You typically see that for this most improved player. Who is the most surprising person that became an all-star starter, first or second all-NBA finisher to win the award? You saw it with Julius Randle last year. That's why John Morant is getting the love that he, I think deserves for most improved player. But also to your point, to Josh's point, to everybody else's point, it's not that unexpected. It was expected. This was always in the realm of possibility in his 3rd year. So I do agree Desmond Bane probably has the better case when you actually talk about the leap made. And then at the end of the day, Taylor Jenkins, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Monty Williams deserved it last year. He did not win it. That should not be the fuel behind the fire for him to win it this year. No coach did a better job than Taylor Jenkins this year in terms of overcoming or going beyond expected results, going beyond what was expected, especially when you consider he was missing his best player for 25 games. Taylor Jenkins deserves Coach of the Year. But another significant development was the fact that Jaren Jackson Jr., Damichael, was not a finalist for the Defensive Player of the Year. Marcus Smart, Mikal Bridges, Rudy Gobert, they all deserve it. But in my opinion, Jaren Jackson Jr. deserved it a bit more this year than I think Rudy Gobert did. I certainly do think that. Rudy Gobert may have been more impactful as a defender, but when you consider the defensive activity stats as well as impact, I think that Jaren Jackson Jr. probably had a better case. I thought he should have been a finalist.
It's tough, Shawn. When it comes down to that defense, there's a lot of name, over game in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation as well. It's part of earning your stripes. I think the bigger discussion with Jaren Jackson will be if he, gets that first team all defensive nod. That's the discussion where it comes to him, because the 3 players that we mentioned for Defensive Player of the Year, Marcus Smart, Mikal Bridges, and Rudy Gobert. This doesn't include, Giannis, Draymond, and those guys that he's going to have to battle for that award. Being first team all defense. It's hard for me to say he should have been a finalist. We know he had a great defensive season. For one, I'm happy that they put 2 guards on there. I think that bodes well for guys like Dillon Brooks, going forward if he plays, the more throughout a season, because I've always thought this, guards in the NBA, you guard triple threat guys who are way more, skilled, advanced offensively than a lot of these big men who basically you just sink into the paint and they're going to go one way or the other way, and you're just helping out, blocking guys who are much smaller. Jaren Jackson Jr. did more than that this year. Guys like him, Draymond, I have a special Bam Adebayo. I have a special love for the way that they play defense, because they can switch out onto those smaller guards and they hold their own, in the paint as well. So all that to say, it was a tough draw, I think, for Jaren this year. Rudy Gobert, you talk about name over game. he's always gonna be in that conversation as long as the Jazz have a really good team, and his defensive numbers are still pretty good. So when it comes down to it, more people are just paying attention to Rudy Gobert on defense than Jaren Jackson Jr. And again, name over game. Next season, now, if the Grizzlies make a run in this postseason, look at Mikal Bridges, for example. I think that's the perfect example. Last season, you saw a lot of people in Phoenix saying Mikal Bridges was the guy who was being snubbed out of that conversation. And I think he was one of the guys that didn't make an all-defensive team. And he got Matisse Thybulle in Philly. I was at the Inquirer, and so I remember how big of a conversation that was, that Matisse Thybulle, as a role player, as a backup guy, got selected over Mikal Bridges. But now Mikal Bridges has the name after the Suns made a run, and look at it. He's rewarded. So I think that's how it's going to play out for Jaren. This year, you're building that name as that defensive guy, led the league in blocks, build it throughout this playoff run. Next season, he plays the same exact way. He'll be a finalist.
I think you bring up a great point. Marcus Smart is another example. If the Boston Celtics do not have their defensive leap as a team, like we've seen in 2022, Marcus Smart always deservedly has had a very good defensive reputation, but he has been the driving force behind their defense. You're absolutely correct. So I do, you bring up an excellent point. I do feel that with as close as the impact of Gobert and Jaren Jackson Jr. is, Gobert's earned the right to be in this finalist discussion. He's deserved the right to get that nod for his reputation. I hope that Jaren's overall body of work, that reputations from others who don't have that this year, I hope that doesn't deny him first team all defense, because I certainly do think that he's impressed enough to be on that. But you've mentioned a point that I mentioned as well before, which is a very astute point. Reputation does matter, as it should in these discussions. Jaren Jackson Jr. is gaining that this year for that to be, on his side in years to come. But at the end of the day, the snubbing of Desmond Bane, the snubbing of Jaren Jackson Jr., the recognition for Ja and Taylor Jenkins, it again just goes back to how special this season has been. And regardless of what happens in the playoffs, how special it is that trio plus Jenkins being together going forward, why that is so awesome for the Grizzlies. But I'll be honest, nobody wants to discuss that. We want to discuss why those things stand out to make the Grizzlies win this playoff series. Damichael, it's been another fun episode, but I'm telling you what, I am ecstatic. I am excited. I'm going to have to stop from yelling in tomorrow's episode when we break down game 2, sir. I'm looking forward to having that show with you.
Can't wait, Shawn. Just to the Grizzlies fans out there, just be cool. It's game 1. John Morant said after the game, we were in the same exact position that they are in last season. The Grizzlies, fans, there's no reason to overreact. You were this team, the team that was in the play-in just last season, that won game 1 and lost the next 4. Not saying the Grizzlies will win the next 4, but that's a prime example right in your face from last season that the series is just getting started, Shawn.
Absolutely. And we knew that it was going to be a tough series. And here's a big key for me on all this. Minnesota came out and punched him in the mouth. Minnesota came out with Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns playing one of the best games that they've played as a duo all season. We've seen the Timberwolves at their best all season long. Yet the Grizzlies are still here, and we haven't seen the Grizzlies at their best. But here's a big key for you to understand, in my opinion, when it comes to just how much room of improvement there is. Ja Morant, during the season against the Timberwolves, 20 points per game, 7 assists, 40% from the field. Game 1, it was fueled by free throws, 32 points and 8 rebounds. This Grizzlies team still has so much more room to improve, but for those who thought that Ja Morant may not be able to make the impact that a lot of us had hoped he made, he's going to make his impact. Now he's looking to make it to where his other teammates can step up and deliver as well. Michael, it's been a pleasure. Hope you have a great Monday as well. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, as tomorrow's episode will be all about previewing game 2. So the Grizzlies look to even the series 1-1 against the Timberwolves. Have a great night.